run out of subject material. And so the next time, you maybe think about the Bible and it's so long and it takes you so long to read all the way through it from Genesis to Revelation, just remember that that's job security for us preachers. So just remember that. God made sure he gave us plenty of subject material. And isn't that right, Brother Wayne? We won't get through all of it in a lifetime, so Richard don't have to worry about, running out of stuff to preach and teach. Plenty of it there. So I think the Lord knew what he was doing, so I'm appreciative of that. 1 Samuel chapter 25 this evening is where I'd like for us to study. We are, of course, studying the monarchy. We are kind of transitioning now over into David, really focusing in on him. Saul's about to leave the scene for good here in just a few chapters. But we skipped a few chapters, but then we've kind of slowed down and zoomed in some places here. And chapter 25, as I read through chapter 25, I thought, this would be another good chapter for us to really zoom in on here. And some material, some stories that, for me, it's that I needed to go back and look at and read and study. A lot of these Old Testament stories, the Old Testament material, sometimes we just let slip by the wayside there. But this is a good chapter, 1 Samuel 25, and this is kind of part 2, David fleeing from Saul. That, of course, is the context. You remember in the previous lesson we were talking about David and Saul at the cave at En-Gedi, right here on the western shore of the Dead Sea. In chapter 25, David's, the context shifts just a little bit west over here to Ma'on or Carmel. I know you can't read the writing there, but in the chapter before, David and Saul have this discussion outside the cave. David had an opportunity to kill him, and what did David do? Yeah, spared his life, right? But, had some proof to show that, hey, I could have taken your life, Saul, but he chose not to. So a righteous act on the part of David, but I think that chapter also brought out again, emphasizing the fact that, what Saul was doing was evil to David. David didn't deserve the treatment that he was receiving, but David showed a lot of restraint. And here in chapter 25, going to kind of be another test of David's restraint. And maybe we see a little bit more of the human side of David in this chapter. We might, think about David now more on a human level like me and you. And we certainly see that here in chapter 25. But this is a good chapter about Nabal and Abigail. I tried to go back and make corrections. I know on my sheet here I had to pencil them in, but I tried to correct the type on yours. But I got to calling Nabal Naboth. Okay, so if you see Naboth, I mean Nabal. But I think I made all those corrections there. This individual that's we're going to talk about today's name is Nabal. David, Nabal, and Abigail are the three key characters in this particular chapter. All right, let's look at chapter 25. Let's look at the first verse here. Number 1 on your handout, the death of Samuel, and I want to get your feedback here. But verse 1 of chapter 25 in 1 Samuel tells us that Samuel died. Then Samuel died, and the Israelites gathered together and lamented or mourned for him and buried him at his home in Ramah. And David arose and went down to the wilderness of Paran. So we read about the death of Samuel the prophet, and then David shifts locations. My first question here for us to discuss is, the text tells us that the people of Israel mourned or lamented the death of Samuel. Why? By the way, who is Samuel? Who was Samuel? Priest, prophet, what was he instrumental in accomplishing with regard to the nation of Israel? We got to think back a few lessons. Who was the man who appointed the first king in Israel? Samuel. Yeah. So Samuel was this instrumental character in the history of Israel because he was instrumental in establishing the monarchy. Okay? So, a great leader, a great man, well respected, highly regarded. We can go back at the beginning of 1 Samuel and read how, look, the people loved Samuel. They didn't like some of the other religious leaders, but Samuel was highly regarded. Okay? And so, when a good man dies, a highly respected person in the kingdom, God's people, we mourn over that sort of thing. He was a good man. He was a great man in Israel in a lot of ways. So Samuel was certainly a wonderful person, and certainly a dominant, important person. We're reading from the book of 1 Samuel, right? So he was a great man in Israel in a lot of ways. But my second question is how did this affect David? I mean, outside looking in here, from what we know of, David's relationship with Samuel, how do you think this affected David? You think this was good or bad for him? Well, think back a few chapters when Saul's, again trying to take David's life. Do you remember who David fled to? Who'd he go to in chapter 19? Fled to Samuel, right? Samuel was the prophet who anointed Saul, and he was the prophet who anointed David. Samuel's this man of God, that David trusts and David knows. And so you lose a man like that in your life at this point in your life. I imagine this was probably a low point for David, right? Who's that person? Who's your first phone call when you get in trouble? Who's your first phone call? Who was your first phone call? And then when that person passes away, that's a loss. That's a big loss. So I imagine that this probably affected David in a negative way. The Bible doesn't elaborate on that, but I think it's important maybe that we pay attention to that. So David shifts location slightly to the wilderness of Paran, just west of where he was there on the edge of the Dead Sea. All right, let's look at number 2 here. Nabal and Abigail. Verse 2, it says, there was a man in Maon whose business or whose possessions was in Carmel. And I know you can't see the names on the map here, but those two places are fairly close together. Right in this area on the map, those two little dots were nearly touching each other. So there was a man in Maon whose business or possessions was in Carmel, and the man was very rich. He had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. Back in those days, your wealth was in the form of livestock, right? If you had a lot of animals, you was rich, right? He had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. And he was shearing his sheep in Carmel. And the name of the man was Nabal, and the name of his wife Abigail. And she was a woman of good understanding and beautiful appearance. But the man was harsh and evil in his doings. He was of the house of Caleb. All right, let's stop there and fill out the blanks here, number 2. Does anybody have a footnote here, or does anybody know what the name Nabal means? The text will tell us here in just a little bit, but do you know what the name Nabal means? Don't name your child Nabal, okay? It means fool, okay? I don't think I know of anybody named Nabal, but it's what the name means. It means fool. And the text tells us that Nabal was rich and what? Cruel. Okay. Is that what the King James says? Yeah. What's the actual word used in the churlish? Yeah, or cruel, harsh, evil. Nabal was rich and mean. Okay. Rich and mean, rich and evil. Whatever word you want to use there, it's a similar idea. But what about Abigail? Beautiful and intelligent. Yeah. It says that she was a beautiful appearance and a woman of good understanding, the New King James has. Beautiful and intelligent. Nabal was rich and mean. A big difference between the two, right? A foolish man who's mean, but's got a beautiful and intelligent wife. Didn't deserve her, right? So a big difference between the two folks there. So that's our introduction to Nabal and Abigail. But here's kind of where the meat of the story gets going here in verses 4 through 11. So let's pay close attention to this reading and then answer a few questions. Verse number 4, it said, When David heard in the wilderness that Nabal was shearing his sheep, he sent 10 young men, and David said to the young men, Go up to Carmel, go to Nabal, and greet him in my name, and thus you shall say to him who lives in prosperity, Peace be to you, peace to your house, and peace to all you have. Now I've heard that you have shearers, your shepherds were with us, and we did not hurt them, nor was there anything missing from them all the while they were in Carmel. Ask your young men, and they will tell you. Therefore let my young men find favor in your eyes, for we come on a feast day, and please give whatever comes to your hand to your servants and to your son David. So when David's young men came, they spoke to Nabal according to all these words in the name of David, and waited. Then Nabal answered David's servants and said, Who is David, and who is the son of Jesse? There are many servants nowadays who break away each one from his master. Shall I then take my bread and my water and my meat that I have killed for my shearers and give it to men when I do not know where they are from? So David's young men turned on their heels and went back, and they came and told him all these words. So a transaction here, a conversation happens between the servants of David and Nabal, this guy who's got a lot of property. He's got a lot of possessions, got a lot of food, water, provisions. What is David asking from Nabal? Here. We want you to share. David's on the run. He's got this group of men with him. Evidently, they'd been camping out in the wilderness, and Nabal's shepherds been there, and they're like, hey, we're camping with your shepherds, the other day. And hey, we were good to them. We took care of them. And hey, ask them. They'll tell you. We were nice to them. And basically David's saying, Nabal, we need some help. We need some provisions here for me and my men. Would you please share what you got? Okay? Bread, water, meat. Nabal? What did Nabal do? Nope. Nope. And not just that, but going back to what did it tell us about Nabal? He's foolish man and harsh, evil, churlish, whatever word you want to use here. We see this coming out in his response in verse 10. This is interesting. He says, he answered David's servants and said, Who is David? The servants come to Nabal and say, Look, we're speaking for David here. This is his request. And Nabal says, Who is David, and who is the son of Jesse? When I first read that, I said, well, is that a sincere question? Does he really not know David? And I think as we read the rest of this chapter and think about this a little bit, the answer is no. He knows who David is. He's being evil here. He's kind of an insult here. Who is David? Who is the son of Jesse? And some have made the observation that when somebody said son of Jesse to David, that sometimes that little phrase was kind of used in a bad sense, kind of an insult to him. But who is David? Who is the son of Jesse? I don't think he's sincere there. And then what does he say at the end of verse 10? What does he imply? There are many servants nowadays who break away, each one from his master. What's he saying about David? David's just a runaway servant from Saul. What do you think about that? Not right, is it? So Nabal is treating David with contempt here. Okay, definitely not the right way to respond to this request from the Lord's anointed. Okay, this was definitely the wrong thing to do. By the way, why does Nabal reject David's request? What would you say? I think selfish is a good word. Yeah. Selfish, covetous, evil. Evil characters coming out here. Yeah. Yeah, and evidently he's not very thankful for how, David's men had treated his servants, right? So these character flaws that the text informs us, about, first of all, about Nabal, we can kind of see this in action here. All right, let's see how David responds here. Now, you remember back in chapter 24, David had this opportunity to kill Saul, and he shows some restraint. Saul is repaying David, evil, and although David's been good to him, and what we have, brethren, in chapter 25, it's interesting. It's kind of like a parallel here. And I'm kind of fast forwarding a little bit, but I think what we have in this story with Nabal is kind of another or Saul's counterpart here. Okay, somebody who's parallel, you might say, to Saul, kind of doing the same thing, that Saul's doing, kind of the same character, same attitude, and so it's kind of some interesting connections here. But let's see how David responds to this guy who doesn't treat him very well, just like Saul treated him. So verse 12 says, So David's young men turned on their heels and went back, and they came and told him all these words. Verse 13. Then David said to his men, Every man gird on his sword. So every man girded on his sword, and David also girded on his sword. And about 400 men went with David, and 200 stayed with the supplies. Now one of the young men told Abigail, Nabal's wife, saying, Look, David sent messengers from the wilderness to greet our master, and he reviled them. But the men were very good to us. We were not hurt, nor did we miss anything as long as we accompanied them when we were in the fields. They were a wall to us, both by night and day, all the time we were with them keeping the sheep. Now therefore know and consider what you will do, for harm is determined against our master and against all the household. For he is such a scoundrel that one cannot speak to him. All right, pause here. David's initial reaction. What is David planning to do? It's under number 4 here. What's David planning to do according to verse 13? Yeah, what does the text say? What did David tell his men to do? Get your sword. That's equivalent to load your guns, right? So he's planning to what? What do you do with a sword? You fight, you kill. Okay? So David is planning to kill. That's what he's planning to do. And one of Nabal's servants, kind of understands what's going on here. And he goes to Abigail, Nabal's wife, and tells him about Nabal's foolish decision. See under number 4, the servant knows that something bad is going to happen here. And we read how he takes this to Abigail. And why does he take this to Abigail? You look at verse 17. Why does the servant bring all this to Abigail? Say it again. Yeah, so he knows that David's planning to, punish Nabal here. Why didn't the servant go to Nabal? You can't talk any sense into that guy, right? So he knows that Abigail's the only one that can fix this, and so Nabal won't listen to anyone. All right, verse 18 through 31. This is the longest section in this paragraph, and this is maybe a longer chapter, but verses 18 through 31 here. This is a long reading, and this is Abigail's reaction here. This is how she responds, and I think this is, the most important part of the chapter, but I think we can really, there's a lot of meaning here, and I think the lessons of this chapter are right here in this part, okay? The key themes, the key lessons are taught here in Abigail's response to David. So, and this is really some good material here. I want us to just read carefully here. Verse 18. It says, Then Abigail made haste, and she took 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 sheep already dressed, 5 seahs of roasted grain, 100 clusters of raisins, and 200 cakes of figs, and loaded them on donkeys. And she said to her servants, Go on before me, see, I am coming after you. But she did not tell her husband Nabal. So first of all, what does she do here? So she loads up this food, she loads up these provisions that David had originally asked for. So she prepares this gift that David had originally asked from Nabal, and doesn't tell Nabal about it. It says, So it was as she rode on the donkey that she went down under cover of the hill, and there were David and his men coming down toward her, and she met them. Verse 21. Now David had said, now watch this in verse 21. David had said, surely. Now, so this is kind of the text, kind of rewinding for us just a moment and telling us more about David's reaction. It says in verse 21, David had said, surely in vain I have protected all that this fellow has in the wilderness, so that nothing was missed of all that belongs to him, and he has repaid me evil for good. Does that sound familiar? It's a good verse to put a star next to, okay? Again, David says, look, my guys were nice to this man, protected all that he had, all his possessions. We were kind of a guard to him, a force that was protecting his stuff, his people. And this man's repaid me evil for good. Verse 22. May God do so and more also to the enemies of David if I leave one male of all who belong to him by morning light. Now pause here and look at the outline here. Looking at B, I think it's pretty clear how this man now resembles Saul. That was my first discussion question here. Nabal is repaying David evil, although David had done good to him, just like Saul had done, okay? So Nabal's foolish just like Saul, or Saul's foolish just like Nabal, okay? But verse 22, what is David planning to do? I've kind of already answered that question, but here's the specifics here. Verse 22. What was David going to do? Yeah. Kill all the males. Okay, so I know if you're reading from the King James Version, there's an interesting phrase there. It says that if I leave any that, I'll just use the word urinates, against the wall. And that the reason the King James translates that is because that's a literal translation. And basically, it's a reference to the males, okay? We can kind of get that. And there may be some imagery here. One commentator mentioned that kind of maybe some language on the part of David kind of saying that Nabal's a dog and all the other males in Nabal's house, they're dogs too. Okay? Yeah, he's not very happy. So that's why you have kind of the strong statement there. If I leave anyone that urinates against the wall, or anyway, the references to the males, okay? If I leave one male, so he's planning to kill all the males that belong to Nabal, whether it be Nabal's kids or Nabal's servants, okay? He's planning to destroy those males that belong to Nabal. He's planning to kill them. All right, verse 23. It says, now when Abigail saw David, she dismounted quickly from the donkey, fell on her face before David, and bowed down to the ground. She fell at his feet and said, on me, my lord, on me let this iniquity be. Please let your maidservant speak in your ears and hear the words of your maidservant. Now watch verse 25. It says, please let not my lord regard this scoundrel Nabal, for as his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name, and folly is with him. Nabal's living up to his name. He's foolish. But I, your maidservant, did not see the young men of my lord when you sent. Now verse 26, now therefore, my lord, as the Lord lives and as your soul lives, since the Lord has held you back from coming to bloodshed and from avenging yourself with your own hand, now then, let your enemies and those who seek harm for my lord be as Nabal. And now this present which your maidservant has brought to my lord, let it be given to the young men who follow my lord. And please forgive the trespass of your maidservant, for the Lord will certainly make for my lord an enduring house, because my lord fights the battles of the Lord, and evil is not found in you throughout your days. Yet a man has risen to pursue you and seek your life, but the life of my lord shall be bound in the bundle of the living with the Lord your God. And the lives of your enemies he shall sling out as from the pocket of a sling. And it shall come to pass when the Lord has done for my Lord according to all the good that he has spoken concerning you, and has appointed you ruler over Israel, that this will be no grief to you, nor offense of heart to my Lord, either that you have shed blood without cause, or that my Lord has avenged himself. But when the Lord has dealt well with my Lord, then remember your maidservant. Okay. So that's all we're going to be able to read for this evening. But what's going on here? We'll take a closer look at the outline next time, but let me just kind of hit the high points. Look at verse 26. And Abigail says, the Lord has what? What does it say in verse 26? Held you back from coming to bloodshed and from avenging yourself with your own hand. What does that tell us about David's initial reaction about telling his men to put their swords on? Was that the right decision or the wrong decision? It wasn't the right decision. And Abigail is saying here that through her, being kind of a mediator here, the Lord is holding David back from committing this evil. Isn't that right? The Lord is working through this woman to keep David from doing what? Avenging himself, right? Now you think back to the chapter before, David's kind of like, you know what, we don't need to kill Saul, he's thinking clearly, he's thinking right. And then over here in chapter 25, Nabal won't give him as many food, and David's like, all right, let's get the guy. And now Abigail's saying, now David, I think what we see here is maybe a little bit, see the human side of David. We see a man who's, back with Saul, he's got a lot of restraint, and he's holding it. But now in chapter 25, something a little different happens, but it's kind of the same deal. Now David's ready to pull his sword out. Abigail says, the Lord is holding you back. The Lord is restraining you from doing this? Okay, and David kind of comes to his senses here. And there's more, and we ain't got time right now. I know this bell's just about to ring in about 10 seconds, but there's some more things that she says here, especially in verse 28. You know, it's kind of prophetic in nature. You know, a lot of times in Scripture, you know, it seems like people will kind of speak better than they know, you know, and it's all out of inspiration. In verse 28, he says, "The Lord will certainly make for my Lord an enduring house, because my Lord fights the battles of the Lord, and evil is not found in you throughout your days." Abigail's saying, the Lord has some good things prepared for you, David. You just keep the faith. You do what is right, and the Lord's going to take care of you. Appreciate your attention this evening. Yeah. You're going to get to do the songs. Okay, I appreciate it. It's been good to be with you all this evening. I want to just pause for just a second and direct some things to the adult class here. If that was with me up here in the auditorium, did anybody have anything to add to our discussion tonight? Any comments, any questions? We've got some application to draw here from chapter 25, and we're not quite done. But there's going to be some things I want to bring attention to by way of application. But did anybody have anything to add to our discussion before we go to our devotional thought this evening? All right, just wanted to give you that opportunity. So, been leaving us just with a little short devotional thought as we close for the night and head to our homes. Just something short for us to think about. I know we all like short. I know sometimes when I say short, it just ends up not being short. But I know that. But I want to just share with you just a passage here, and I'll just kind of paraphrase what Jesus says leading up to this passage. We've been kind of looking at the different places in the Sermon on the Mount over the last few weeks and months, and picking out some verses here that stood out to me. You know, in chapter 6, Jesus, there at the end of chapter 6, he says, you know, don't worry about your life, what you're going to eat, what you're going to drink, nor about your body, what you're going to put on. And he teaches us there not to worry, because why? Well, because God is our Father, and God, we're more important than the birds and the flowers. And if God takes care of the birds and the flowers, he's going to take care of us, right? That's the promise we have as the disciples of the Lord. And as long as we seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, all these things are going to be added to us. So it's our job simply to have faith and to do the Lord's work, and he's going to take care of us. But I was looking at verse 34, kind of the last verse in this little section today, and it kind of stood out to me, and maybe sometimes